Do you see a drop off in the quality of what's coming out of Cuba?
You mean in recent years?
In recent years. In recent years. In particularly, I would have to say after the 90s. After that boom in the 90s, did you see or did you experience for even a slight moment that, yeah, there is a slightly drop off in the quality?
It's a good question. You know, I was old enough to be working here in the early 90s when the first real cigar boom kicked off, in my life at least. And that was driven by Cigar Aficionado. And they were very Cuba-centric when it came to what they considered the finest cigars. And at the time, I think it was accurate. You know, very few people were making great cigars outside of Cuba. That drove a massive increase in demand for Cuban cigars. And that culminated, unfortunately, for Cuba and for the rest of us, with a reaction from Cuba to that demand that was incorrect. They ramped up volume when they didn't really have well-matured fermented tobacco in sufficient quantity and the right number of rollers to scale that increase in volume.
Yes.
And the consequence of that was by the late 90s, we were seeing cigars coming out that were using tobacco that had not been correctly fermented or aged enough. And also the construction was problematic. The rollers were either rushing the job, maybe the quality control were not testing all the cigars properly. There were multiple factors. But Cuba learned their lesson. And then we had this sort of lull in the 2000s where the industry came off its peak and things became quieter, for Cuba at least, and the interest the Cigar Aficionado generated sort of died down.
Yes.
The next real cigar boom that I've noticed has really picked up from about 2018, 2019 on, and got magnified through COVID. When that happened, Cuba was suffering from many issues when it comes to being able to grow, cultivate, and generally produce cigars. Many of those not their own making, you know, between the embargo, hurricanes, and the other issues, loss of personnel to emigration and so on. So that overall capacity is quite limited now. I think 40, 50 million cigars at a push is what they can produce. Luckily, they did not respond to the massive increase in demand over the last few years by ramping out extra production. To many's dismay, they did it through price. They pushed up the price.
Yeah.
But that is a more sensible reaction and a better reaction to quality concerns than what they had done before. And when I visit Cuba, I'm always left with the incredible feeling that not a frustration, why do they allow bad cigars to be made and exported? That's not the feeling I get. It's a frustration we've all had when we like a cigar that doesn't draw well. I'm actually very much drawn and impressed by the miracle that they're able to make one amazing cigar, let alone the 40, 50 million they do. Because they have so many challenges, they have so many obstacles in their way, and yet using very traditional, in some cases, 100-year-old techniques, they're still able to put these together. So to address your question in a very, very roundabout fashion, it is frustrating. Remember, it is a artisanal handmade product, really extraordinarily skillful. Remember that the country you're dealing with in Cuba has so many other issues to deal with. And if you take those things together, then it's much easier to forgive the odd cigar that is problematic. However, I say all of that, it is not to disrespect the money that has been spent by the customer to buy that.
Absolutely.
And that is the problem. It's not the customer's fault. It's not the retailer's fault either. It's not the distributor's fault. Ultimately, it does fall back on Cuba to recompense the customer
Yes.
for the poor cigar.
Yes.
How do we square that circle? I'm not entirely sure, but most cigar smokers, when you go to Cuba and see it and come away, you're filled with a sense of sort of forgiveness, perhaps.
Yes.
For what they do.
Absolutely.
The lack of perfection relative to other producers.
Yes.
Because of their situation.
Following up on that.